people to come. Then I will perform 2 poems and then I will sing Malaika. Ulimwiza, 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 ulimwiza. Malamu, yoza malamu, yoza malamu. Afrika.
To get started, please take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are we doing? Thank you. Are we ready to talk Africa? Are we ready to look at the state of the African region? Are we ready to explore the way forward? Yeah, no? Yes. Yes. My name is Julie Gishuru. It's an honor to be with you. I'm a passionate Pan-Africanist and an Afro-optimist, and I'm humbled to be here to guide this session this morning as we look at the role of regional cooperation in tackling fragility on the African continent. We are the hashtag is Africa, SOAR, State of the Africa region, so please do share your views. We are also live streaming, and we welcome all those who are joining us from outside this room, across the African continent and across the globe as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to recognize and honor the musician who played some excellent music for us a few minutes ago. His name is Menes La Plume. He was born in Lubumbashi, DRC. And he was a refugee. I want to honor him because having gone through a traumatic experience, he gives back in a big, big way. He shares the message of the refugee community, of the struggle, of the needs. And he also holds a festival every year in Malawi in a refugee camp. It's called the Tumaini Music Festival, and it's massive. Can we just honor him one more time for being a part of the African solution? And that's why we are all here today, ladies and gentlemen. To kick us all off and to set context for us, let me now welcome to come up here and share opening remarks, Hafez Ghanem of the World Bank. Please, let's give him a warm round of applause as he joins us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Good morning, honorable ministers, honorable Prime Minister, friends and colleagues. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to our biannual State of the Africa Region event. And also I would like to say hello to all of those who are joining us online. Let me, first of all, particularly thank our panelists, whom you will be hearing from shortly, especially His Excellency Prime Minister Hassan Ali Khair of Somalia, His Excellency, Her Excellency Minister Aishatu Bulamakane from Niger, His Excellency Minister Alamin Usman May from Cameroon, Ms. Nana Apenam Dagadu from Save the Children, United States, and of course, my friend and colleague Albert Zufak of the Africa Region Chief Economist. And I would like to add my voice to Julie's to thank Menes Laplume for kicking us off with his wonderful music. Let me start with the state of Africa's economy. Economic growth in the region is estimated to be 2.3% in 2018. That's down from 2017, when we had 2.5% growth. And it is below population growth for the fourth year in a row. Now, this sounds very bad, and it is not good. However, I'd like to point out very huge differentials in growth amongst our countries. We have countries in Africa today, like Ethiopia, like Kenya, like Ghana, like Cote d'Ivoire, like Senegal, who are growing at 6–7%. So we have a lot of examples of success stories in Africa. We also have countries who are, especially the oil exporting countries, who have been impacted by the decline in oil prices, and who are growing or not growing at all, actually, or who are growing at a very, very slow pace and bringing down the average. But overall, having a growth rate that is lower than the population growth rate is not a good thing, especially when you're trying to eradicate extreme poverty. I would like to remind everybody that while Africa has made good progress in reducing the rate of poverty across the continent, this has not been enough. In fact, with continually growing population, and the actual number of people living in poverty went up by over 130 million during the last 2 decades. So actually, we've been bringing down the poverty rate, but the absolute number of poor people in Africa has actually been rising. This is something that we really need to change. We at the World Bank are committed to winning the war on poverty. And the only way we can win the war on poverty at a global level is to win it, first of all, in Africa. So how to win the war on poverty? In our team here at the World Bank's Africa region is focusing in 4 areas: economic transformation and job creation, especially by harnessing the digital revolution to leapfrog and speed up inclusive growth. The second area our region. And that is what I will, today in my discussion, I will focus on this contribute to reducing fragility and conflict. More than half of the world's fragile countries are in Africa today. And this means that about 28% of Africa's population live in fragile situations. This fragility weighs heavily in terms of human suffering for those trapped in poverty. In fragile countries, the poverty rate has been extremely high, 55% over the last decade. But fragility also drags down the overall region's economic performance. So the fact that one country is, that there is conflict and instability in one country has effects across its borders and across the region. So what should we do? We are substantially expanding our support to fragile countries and their people, and finding new ways to tackle entrenched problems. And we need to work together to do that. So the first thing that we're focusing on is to really try to identify the drivers of fragility and see how, as a development institution, we can contribute to dealing with those drivers. Fragility and conflict have many drivers. There are many political drivers, maybe, I don't know, ethnic drivers or religious drivers. But there are also economic and social drivers. And what we have seen in many of our countries, that there are two important economic and social drivers of fragility that we see. The first one is often what I call is the fact of the absence of the state, or the loss of credibility of the state. In many of our countries, there are whole regions where the state is virtually absent, is not providing services, whether they are social services, health, education, whether they're water and electricity, or security and justice. And when the state is not providing the services and nature does not like the void, other groups come in and take its place. The second, so this is the first driver of fragility, and we see it in many of our countries, whole lagging regions where the state is not present. Another important driver of fragility is what we see is loss of hope for the youth. The youth feeling that they don't have hope for a better future, that they feel excluded, a strong feeling of injustice. And so those two drivers are things that we as a development institution and with our partners in development and with our counterparts in government who focus on economic and development issues, these are areas where we can make a difference, and these are areas where we would like to do more work. The second point on fragility that I wanted to highlight, other than looking at the drivers, is really the importance of looking at fragility from a regional or sub-regional perspective. Conflict and fragility do not stop at state borders. They actually, we see them, for example, in Africa today, conflict and fragility do not stop at the borders of Mali. They cover the entire Sahel. And so it is important for us to work together in a regional way and that the countries in every sub-region work together to deal with those things. Let me, so the examples of regional approaches are in the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and the Lake Chad Basin. The Horn of Africa is home of around 180 million people, and today we are seeing strong political leadership helping to bring countries closer together. One of the strong political leaders of the Horn of Africa is sitting with us today, the Prime Minister of Somalia. And this strong political leadership in Ethiopia, in political movement can be translated into economic dividends for the population. For this political change, for this political transformation to be successful and to be sustainable, it is important that it leads to real, tangible results. And that is one of the things, that is an area where we're working very closely with the countries of the Horn and hopefully, and with our partners. And I see one of our key partners sitting here, Stefano from the European Commission. Welcome. So working together, we really need to support those countries. Similarly, in the Sahel, we are supporting the momentum created by the G5, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. And we have the Honorable Minister from Niger with us today. I'm so happy to see her here. Instability and fragility in the Sahel are driven by land pressures from rapid population growth and environmental degradation. Almost half of the population of 80 million people in the Sahel are under 15 years old. And there is a lack of economic opportunity, particularly for young women and men, creating a regional fragility trap. Across the Sahel, over 2,000 schools have closed due to persistent insecurity. That means that 400,000 children are not in school, and over 10,000 teachers are out of work. Fertility rates in the Sahel are among the highest in the world. Adolescent fertility rates in the Sahel are almost twice as high than the average for the rest of Africa. Across large areas of northern Mali and the Sahel, the state is quite absent, and that void is being filled by militant groups. We are working together with our partners, with the G5 Sahel Alliance approach, looking at a specific region of the country. We're doing the same thing in the Central African Republic. There's a project there that I was just visiting a few weeks back, the Londo project. So, finally, I would like to make 2 points that are important in fragile situations in general, and that we have found to be particularly important. One is the focus on empowering women. Oh, I should have said that earlier to get more applause. Okay, let me tell you why the focus on empowering women. Obviously, empowering women is important in its own right, as something good, as a human right. But it is also important for economic development and for dealing with fragility and conflict. One of our biggest problems in our, as I was saying, is loss of, we have a lot of young people who feel that they have no hope and no opportunities. And an important reason for that is the very weak human capital. So we have those young people who have very poor education, who are often stunted, and are there in large numbers. It is important to deal with this issue. And the one important way of dealing with it is to make sure that our girls are educated, that they don't get married when they are, and have children when they themselves are still children. So what we are doing with many of the governments in the Sahel is to put in place projects that focus on educating girls. We want to keep the girls at school until at least secondary school. We want to provide also, so sometimes the families, so you act on the education, but also the families, sometimes they take their girls out of school and marry them off because of poverty. So you need to put in place a social protection system to provide conditional cash transfers for poor families who keep their daughters in school. You also need to work on the health system to ensure reproductive health services for the women and also health services for the children. So, and finally, you need to provide economic opportunities for the young women as they finish their education. So this is really the approach, and it is important for dealing with the weak human capital index in our fragile situations. And it is really something that we need to focus on in fragile countries, but I have to tell you, I personally am convinced that this is an issue that we need to deal with it all across our continent, fragile and not fragile. So the other point that I wanted to make is that the importance of digital transformation and using technology in fragile regions. I mean, when I say this, people say, oh, you know, but those countries are with conflict, they're so poor. Isn't this that you all would prefer? From robotics to online education platforms, to mobile payments, to social media. Because I think it is really giving us hope. And I would like to say, like Julie, I am personally very optimistic about Africa, and I consider myself also a Pan-Africanist. And I hope that after today's discussion, all of you will join Julie and I in becoming Pan-Africanists and African optimists. Thank you very, very much.
For that opener. And ladies and gentlemen, do we really have a choice? I don't think we do. We have to have hope, and we have to deliver change. And our discussion this morning is going to highlight that. I want us to now give a warm welcome to come up and set more context for us, the World Bank Chief Economist for the Africa region, Albert Zoufak, who's going to take us through research and findings that help us to map the way forward. Once again, we are tweeting the hashtag AfricaSOR. Please share your views. Albert, the floor is yours. Very interesting opener we had there, and very inspiring to hear in Mali, 3D printer working on such groundbreaking things as a replacement hand for a young girl. So the possibilities are endless. But take us through the research that you've done and what the numbers are telling us. What do we need to focus on moving forward? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Julie. Honorable guest, good morning. Well, let me first say that the 19th edition of the Africa's Pulse that we are launching today not only updates our macro outlook, but also discusses what is holding back African growth. But not only that, we actually share a couple of opportunities to take us or to move us forward. And the digital revolution is actually one of these opportunities, as Mr. Ghanem has clearly said. Now, in terms of growth and macro outlook, when we last met, it was in Bali in October of 2018. And then we were projecting that economic growth for sub-Saharan Africa in 2018 would be around 2.7% in average, we were then hoping that in 2018, economic growth would be above population growth. But this morning, I have to say that my optimism, because I'm an optimist too, my optimism has been tested somewhat in the past year. Growth has been sluggish. And as a consequence, we have now downgraded our growth estimates for 2018 to only 2.3%. That's 0.4 percentage point lower than October. And that's actually very significant, Julie. Now, for 2019, we are projecting that sub-Saharan Africa would grow in average only by 2.8%. So, Julie, I think we need to pause a little bit and start, asking ourselves some tough questions. Because 3 years after the crisis, the 2016 crisis, our growth is still hovering below 3%. And 3 years in a row, and just like in 2017, our growth is below population growth in 2018, which means technically that, in per capita terms, we're moving backward. Yeah. So we need to speed up growth. And you may wonder, you may say, Albert Zufak is always talking about growth, and why is it that important? It is important because unless we speed up the rate of our economic growth, we will not be able to create the jobs our population needs. We will not be able to tackle the daunting challenge of poverty.
And that is another looming risk. It seems that as Africa, we're letting things happen to us. We are not happening to the world, right? We are not intentionally going out there and creating the way forward that we require. So you've identified, I believe, fragility as a key issue that we need to deal with. And of course, digital is another area. Take us through why those two are so central to the path forward for Africa.
Thank you very much, Julie. But first of all, I think we need to agree, as you have said, that the reasons why our growth is still so sluggish are both global and domestic. From the global perspective, we're still seeing rising trade tensions leading to some protectionism and affecting growth in our largest trading partners. That is clearly having an impact on our growth. We're also seeing more volatile and uncertain commodity prices, although some are trending up. But these are all affecting our growth. But not all our problems are caused by others. Some of them are actually made in our own backyard. Mm-hmm. And let me mention a couple of them. One is macro instability. Macro instability, especially our debt, remains an issue. A number of African countries are now getting into more unsustainable debt management path. Mm-hmm. And that's a matter of concern. We're still seeing a handful of African countries with double-digit inflation. We're still seeing fiscal deficit piling up in some of our countries. We need to tackle macro instability. The second quite important issue that is our own making is uncertainty. Uncertainty of policies, of politics, mm-hmm. and of the regulatory framework is actually affecting investment. And countries like South Africa are actually seeing a decline in investor sentiment. South Africa, one of the 3 largest economies, actually the 2nd largest economy in Africa, mm-hmm. is barely growing at 2%. So Nigeria, for example, is growing at 1.9%. Yes, up from 0.8 last year, but still way below potential. And third, as you have mentioned, fragility. Mm-hmm. Fragility is costing African countries a lot. We are estimating in the Africa's Pulse that fragility in a handful of African countries is costing us all 0.5 percentage point in growth per year. That would make it 2.6% in 5 years. That's very significant. But on fragility, let me also say that we are coming up with a good news. The good news is that it's not a fatality, and it can be overcome. In fact, two of our top performing economies, Ethiopia and Rwanda, were fragile not that long ago. And a number of African countries that are still growing above 5% are probably not classified in the fragile category, but are all affected by fragility. So there is hope that we can still work hard to maintain growth in fragile environment.
And just as I prepare to welcome our panelists to come and take out their seats in a moment, the digital opportunity, highlight that for us. What do you see?
Well, Julie, I'm almost ecstatic about the digital promise. And one of the reasons is that this issue of the pulse has actually tried to assess what the dividend for growth would be if we were to achieve our own targets in digital, on the digital economy. And we're finding that the digital revolution, if embraced, could add up to 2 percentage points of GDP per year to Africa and reduce poverty by 1 percentage point. And those numbers would actually double if they are combined with a strong investment in digital skills. As an economist, I think this is an opportunity not to be missed. And if we do embrace it, we certainly can have a new growth path. We can certainly create more jobs. We can create more, we can boost productivity in existing sectors, as Mr. Ghanen has mentioned. Yes, we need to acknowledge that we're still trailing the rest of the world when it comes to digital infrastructure, broadband penetration, for example.
Right.
We're still lagging, and our countries need to really focus on investing in closing that gap.
But we do have some countries doing incredible things in that regard. I know Rwanda is one of them, and we have Minister Paula Ingabire here with us. Can I welcome now our panel to come up and take their seats? Ladies and gentlemen, Hassan Ali Karaa, Prime Minister of Somalia, please join us on the panel.
I need to move on.
Can we welcome Aïchatou Kane, Prime Minister of Planning of Niger? Thank you. Can we also give a warm welcome to Alamine Ousmane May, Minister of Economy, Planning and Regional Development of Cameroon? Also with us, we have Nana Dagadou, Advisor, Monitoring and Evaluation, Reproductive Health, Save the Children. Let's give her a welcome as she comes up to join us as well. And I'm going to ask Hafez Ghanem, please do come and take a seat up here as well, because there may be questions that come to you from the audience, and Albert will stay with us as well.
That artist?
What is the artist called? Yes, Menes La Plume. Did you have a message for him, yes, sir? Yes? Would you like to start us off with that? Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Where's the artist?
Where are you, Menes? Would you just stand up? There. Would you stand up for us?
If you come here. Here.
Wonderful.
We have something in common, me and him.
Yes.
So we just need to.
Oh.
The former refugees need to get together.
What a moment, ladies and gentlemen. What a special moment. Wonderful.
We're very proud of you. Very proud of you. Very proud of you.
Can you take a picture, please? Just stand together. If you just stand together there and take a picture. Thank you. I would love to join them, and I will join them and cheer. This is the Africa message. Thank you. I'm inspired. What a way to kick off a panel session. Thank you for that, Prime Minister. And I do begin with you on this panel.
I thought we start with the ladies. we Africans are so gentle.
We should start with the ladies, but in this case, because of fragility and the Somalia story, I will begin with you, sir. We've tapped into the importance of regional cooperation in addressing fragility, and we all know Somalia has come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. I want you to start by setting the context for us. What are you working on within the region, the Horn of Africa region right now, that is helping Somalia? And what is the way forward? We have a lot of stakeholders in this room, from the development financiers to, private sector, government is here. What's your message on this journey as you move from fragility, move out of fragility into what we hope will be economic development for Somalia?
Thank you, Julie. I just want to start first by saying that I represent Somalia of today. I represent the Somalia of tomorrow and the future, not the Somalia of the past 25 years or 30 years. Let me just put it into perspective. We are trying to move away from the old narrative that what Africa has been or Somalia has been. So that is the first line of the order of the day that I would like to bring as a message.
Can we give that a round of applause?
And thanks, Julie. The second is that our country now is open for business, and we have a lot of opportunities and potential. The first potential is the people of Somalia, the youth, of which 75% of our population are people under the age of 30. The second is our business communities, who are the most entrepreneurial people that you could think of. And third is our diaspora that you would find globally. And on top of that, a nation with potential of oil, minerals, natural resources, agriculture, fisheries, and potential service economy based on our geographic strategic location. In reality, you're looking at a nation that could have an economy of 300 million people, where you have 15 million people. What does that mean for our region? We need to wake up and see what we have within our continent. So how do we take that forward? We need to create a conducive environment that functions, have political, economic, and security reforms. But then you will need to see that in perspective with the region. What do you do in Somalia impacts Kenya, impacts Djibouti, impacts Ethiopia, impacts Uganda, and Rwanda. So we cannot think of the old structure earlier that has been, we isolate ourselves. We need to see the continent and the region as a whole. We are now putting, therefore, all these changes and reforms in place. But we also have the previous history that brings the fragility aspect of it. Investment is critical, but timing of the investment itself is the essence. That is why we ask our partners to prevent fragility and not to deal with it, and invest at a timely manner. And those of us in the region as leaders now, our president and the rest of the regional leaders, we've come together and we've put in place processes where we are trying to grow our economy. That means that growing the economy in the region, in an interconnected region, will create hope in the entire region.
Thank you.
And that's what will, I think, change the atmosphere and create more hope. And my final point is that all that will require leadership. And those of us who now are the ones leading the region and the continent will also need to change the old habit of way of leading the continent.
Wow. You know, in the green room, allow me to share this. The Prime Minister said to me, as leaders, we need to ask ourselves, is the system changing you, or are you changing the system? And I think that's a very powerful thing. Minister Kane, I come to you now in the Sahel experience. Take us through what Niger and the region is doing.
Niger and the other G5 Sahel countries, in addition to climate shock, we had to face a security shock, and we needed to respond immediately. The initial response was for countries to pool their efforts to tackle common issues of security and development in their areas. And that is why in 2014 the G5 was established, the Sahel G5, to tackle two major issues, security and development. In the area of security, G5 forces had to be established to fight terrorism. It was unfortunate, but it was done. In addition to ensuring security for the zone, we have established a priority investment program to tackle governance issue, the ones that Hafez was talking about, to improve resilience, improve infrastructure.
De gouvernance, je disais, et de sécurité.
And governance, of course, involves security, because security requires investment, particularly in the most disadvantaged areas. With the environment created by the Sahel G5, we have generated a positive response from partners who've created a Sahel Alliance, which was established not only to show solidarity, but to leverage the kind of investment and intervention from organizations and institutions, multilateral institutions such as the World Bank. Another area is another advantage is the rapid response. When heads of state saw that willingness to tackle the real issues that lead to fragility, the kind of fragility we're facing, they asked the Sahel Alliance in 2016 to see what sort of emergency development program could be established to tackle the entrenched issues that lead to fragility. In Niger, for example, in Niger, we have the boundary region, the border region between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. There is a water problem. There is a resilience problem. Social cohesion is also paramount. You are aware, of course, that we have a great deal of inter-community conflict in the area. So these efforts had to be dealt with independently of other things. I also hope to tell you what tangible measures my country is taking.
We will come back to those measures, and just to say that getting to the root causes of a lot of our conflict is central to solving our problems. Let me come now to the Cameroon experience, Minister, and of course your country has been home to many refugees. You understand the issues of fragility. From your perspective, what must we do to tackle this issue and deliver a stable environment for the region and for the continent to plow forward?
Julie, allow me first of all to acknowledge how exciting it is to sit on a panel with a very strong, optimistic moderator you are.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Very humbling. Thank you.
We are all sitting here because we believe in the continent. Because we want to make the continent, not the continent of the future, but the continent of the present. Mm-hmm. And it is possible despite the fragilities, the difficulties, the challenges we are facing. To talk about my country, our experience in dealing with some of the challenges, we want to, first of all, give an answer to the why, and then to what we are doing. Why? Because we believe solidarity, hospitality, and being in full compliance with our international obligations is very important and dear to Cameroonians. We cannot think of Cameroon without integrating our neighboring countries. And I have first mentioned two important directions that will lead to stronger development of our continent in an inclusive manner. I just want to substantiate at this level, this point. It's about addressing regionally, sub-regionally, the concerns, the challenges of nations together. But to come back to Cameroon, we are host of almost 500,000 people, refugees as displaced and displaced people. This is a huge pressure, socially, financially, economically, environmentally. We do our best at the national level, providing not only refugee camps, educations, health to these people. It's not enough to deal with this at the national level. And 4 days ago, I signed with the World Bank a financing agreement of $190 million to support these people displaced as well as refugees. Just to show that the initiative at the national level, which is a very strong commitment of our country, is leveraged by the support through the refugee sub-window at the level of the World Bank. This shows that we need to address these issues globally. We need to see our efforts join, and we need to address the issues of today and tomorrow. Hafez mentioned two aspects we are dealing with at the national level and with respect to our international commitment and support. Presence of state and delivery of services. At this level, with respect to Boko Haram issues, we have an approach that's going to address the security issue with multinational forces. This will lead to bringing back security, peace, stability, and the presence of the administration. But this is only the first part. The second and probably the most important part is to give prospects, horizons to the people, economically, and this is one of the things we are doing with the World Bank. The resources being made available are not only to cater with social services, but to give to those refugees and displaced people means to be inserted in the mainstream of the economy, using their power, manpower, manpower, to deliver what they can do. Because a man who has left his place and who is in another place, he has also some skills, and he wants to be part of the development process, not only of his country, but of the place where he is. And this is the reason why we think, and Albert Zefak mentioned, certainly our path in terms of growth is not sufficient enough. But at the same time, our capacities, potentials, and our strong willingness to transform our continent is sufficiently big to take advantage of digital transformation. Digital will cover all the activities as enabler, because agriculture will not be possible efficiently tomorrow without digital transformation. Commerce, health, education, you name the rest. We therefore believe that fragility today is definitely a challenge, but it's of short term. Development is the challenge of the long term. And it's only if we join efforts, we address issues regionally, sub-regionally, then we'll be able to reach quicker, with great impact, and with less cost, the results we are expecting. This is what we are trying to do at the national level, but we do believe that Cameroon cannot go further, faster, because if it's doing it alone, it's not sufficient. We have to do it in a coalition, And I believe that this is the reason why we have such an attendance today.
Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Nana, I come to your experience now, and you know, Save the Children has worked across the subcontinent. You have a lot of understanding of the on-the-ground issues. And I'll tap back into what Hafez had said. You know, absence of the state is a very big problem when it comes to fragility, hopelessness. That sense of despair is also prevailing. But in this environment, what work are you doing? What is yielding incredible results? And what can you teach us about transformation in such circumstances?
Thank you very much. We've heard from the honorable ministers and the other speakers who went before me that fragility is quite a complex issue. And similarly for us, we work across many different sectors. One of the sectors that we have found to be extremely beneficial in promoting prevention of fragility and also countering its impact has been sexual and reproductive health. For sexual and reproductive health, we found that this has broad benefits, especially when we are working at all socioecological levels. So not only for the women themselves, but for their families, their communities, and then the broader national and regional areas as well. We sort of we can look at the individual, we can look at the community levels and beyond. So for the women, we have found that if we particularly focus on key life stages and transitions, we can meet their needs appropriately. So focusing on an adolescent girl's needs might be different from those of a woman who recently got married and then transitioning on into having 1, 2, and multiple children, and then at some point when she decides to stop having children as well. And so really focusing on those key transition points and what the information and services that that woman might need at each of those stages. Moving further then into the partners and families and communities, we really work to strengthen gender and social norms. So not just the providing of services, but looking at the broader enabling environment. Our partners, the husbands, communities, are they willing to support agency and voice and control for the woman to be able to be more mobile, to be able to engage in livelihood opportunities and education as part of a holistic development for herself. We found that sexual and reproductive health can be one of those ways to bring about consideration, discussion, and really reflection about gender and social norms. And then, so broadly on the community side, getting folks to work together to support the individual women and their families. An example has been in our US-funded Mali project. We've seen that some of the villages have come together, they formed community action groups where they raise funds, they donate per family, small amounts of money, but when combined, they're able to provide ambulance services to transport mothers who might have emergencies when they have to deliver. So they're able to come together not only for those reproductive health services, but the same mechanisms are used to improve nutrition services, so cooking, providing nutritious meals, and other needs of the community.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, as you spoke about, thank you, the sexual and reproductive health, there's a fantastic program in South Africa, I'm not sure if it's present in other countries, called Mothers to Mothers, M2M, where women are able to access information about their bodies, childbirth, health, and much more. And so digital can play a huge role there. Minister Kane, I want to come to you as a champion for women's empowerment to share your perspective on the importance of communities shifting maybe from some of our cultural practices to understand empowerment of women is not a threat. It is a critical issue if we are truly to thrive. What would you say to stakeholders in this room? How do we support each other to get that message across and truly change?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, we were asked to talk to each other and women were asked to Speak up. It's now our time to speak up because others have had far too much to say. It's now our time. So I can see that you're respecting that today. Now, the question you've asked. The question of the empowerment of women and young people, young women in general, well, that's really an issue which has a social aspect to it, but also an economic aspect to it as well. We can't neglect that fact. Niger has asked the World Bank to do a study on gender inequality in my country, and the study has shown that if we succeed in dealing with employment inequality, the role of women, and if we deal with the inequality in terms of education, Niger will be able to increase its GDP by 30%, I repeat, 30% by 2030. So that's the backdrop, because Niger is undertaking a reform process. We've passed new legislation. We've been very, very bold. These are sensitive issues, population issues in a country like mine, which is 90% Muslim, is very sensitive. The president of the country has stated that we have to try to put an end to childhood pregnancy, childhood marriage as well, because the average number of children per women in 2012 was 7. We want to bring that down to 5 in 2025. That ambition really has to be supported, and it is being supported. It's being supported by our partners. We're undertaking a reform process, as I've just said. Education of young women, young girls. That's very important for us. We have to educate them. We have to keep them in school, at least until secondary school level, as you have said. Why? Because education will allow women to be properly educated and therefore enable them to plan their lives based on a clear vision of their future. But it also allows us to put an end to childhood marriage, to put an end to childhood pregnancies as well. That means that through education of young girls, we can really succeed in our population transition. There's a program in Sweden, for example, which is a response to fragility, and it's mentioned in the report. Now, this program allows us to create the conditions to help young girls to get an education. It's one thing to keep girls who are already in school, but it's quite a different kettle of fish to get those who are outside the system and bring them into the education system. This is what we're calling safe spaces. Safe spaces in Niger have allowed us to get 200,000 young Nigerians into the education system, and today they're taking their lives in hand. Not only are they educated, they know how to read and write, but they're also trained. They've also received education in vocational aspects. Family planning, you mentioned that as well. Well, it's a decision which must be a common decision between man and wife. But normally in my country, women don't necessarily have a say in how many kids they have. It's the husband who decides. So husbands have to be sensitized, and they have to support their wives. They have to be sensitized to the risks that women run when they are pregnant over and over again. It's husbands. Husbands have to be brought to accept family planning, so that family planning is something which is a joint decision, man and wife. Now, there's a region in my country, the Zander region, where we can have young women who are only 30 and they're already grandmothers. We want to stop that. This should be stopped and come to an end through our program. We're starting to see that happen now. The question you asked, It's this movement, this trend. It's an overall trend. It's an overall movement. Husbands, but also tribal chiefs. They are highly respected in our society. They play an essential role in this. They're involved in the new trend, the new initiative. Thank you very much.
So much for that. I was speaking to a group of young people about maternal and child health care, and I realized it's not necessarily just about universal health coverage. It starts from intentionality in the family. And allow me on this panel to slightly digress and focus on this issue, because I think if Africa gets her families right, she gets her communities right, she gets her societies right, and she can truly transform. Oui. This issue we face is not a rural issue. It's not just an issue for some cultures. It is a mainstream issue, ladies and gentlemen. I studied in the best schools, and I finished Form 4 at 17, and to my shock and horror, my father brought a man home and said, he's asked for your hand in marriage. In Nairobi, urban center. And I was lucky that I sat with my father and convinced him that the plan was university. I was lucky that he listened. There are many others who don't. And the appeal is, can we get families right? So as we talk about fragility, Mr. Prime Minister, and to all the gentlemen on this panel, I really want you to help us shift society. Share a message with your country, with the continent, with our people, to show that this is not a woman issue, that we are all in this together, and that Africa can truly change this situation. I'll start with you, Prime Minister, and I'll come all the way around. Thank you, please.
No, it's very true, and a very touching story. We have to reflect on this. To me, this is simple arithmetic. Minimum 50% of our population are women. And in order for us to rebuild and reclaim our nation, we must find a way to utilize all available resources and tools to our nation. Meaning that leaving behind 50% of your population, you're already running on a half engine.
Right.
So realistically for us to compete and to rebuild our nation, we cannot use half of our nation. So that should in reality be the setup of the order that we want to see. The second element is this: as we reform our political processes, we have to have in mind to include women in the process. As we promote inclusive growth, we need to make sure youth and women are empowered properly. And as we build our security structures, we need to cater for the entire population. I share this belief, but the reality is that we have to have an open debate about this. And women need to organize themselves and claim their rights.
Yes. Yeah. And men must champion this alongside women in our very patriarchal societies. Minister, please, your contribution on this.
Julie, I think we have to be consistent and coherent with ourselves. If we say that the most important capital is human being, it means that we need to address the issue of both women and men. Secondly, I haven't seen a bird flying high, far, with only one wing. You need the two wings. We have so far not benefited enough from the input of a very strong majority community of our world, which is women. They have to take their place and deliver what they can do best to supplement what people have been doing so far. It's clear to me that the prospects of the continent, Africa we are talking about, the prospect of the world, if we are to address all the challenges we are facing, and the minister from Niger mentioned it. We have some obstacles, historical, traditional, religious, which are preventing women so far to sit where they have to sit. We have to globalize our action towards addressing these weaknesses. It starts with talking, mobilizing, sensitizing, creating more awareness, and where it is possible, even if you have the same level of competence, promote women.
Thank you. You've spoken about this already, but I want to tap into your thoughts on this panel now.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to repeat what I said, you know, my point of view. I want to make one important point. First of all, it is great that we are actually digressing and talking about this issue in this panel. And we should continue talking about it and pushing it, otherwise it will not happen. When I started raising the issue of women empowerment, the importance of female reproductive health services, and so on, the first reaction from many of my colleagues at the bank was, be careful. This is so sensitive and you'll get pushback and people will be upset. But I said, no, I don't want to be careful, actually. I just want to say what I think. So, and I was really pleasantly surprised. I mean, I have the chance of having the opportunity to discuss this with all of the leaders in our continent. And not one of them so far, no, actually only one. Only one out of a large number has pushed back on this.
Do you want to tell us who?
No, no, only one, maybe out of 20, push back on this. Every leader I talk to agrees. And so, but you know, we cannot wait for top-down changes. The rest of us, we have to push, we have to speak about it, and that is the only way that change will happen.
Thank you, and it's great to hear that by and large you're getting good reception to this message. Albert, I'll come to you, and then Nana, you'll have the final word before I go to the floor. Your thoughts?
Well, let me say two things. One, gender economics is not just good economics, it's smart economics. Why? Because our ladies, our girls, do exhibit all the best attributes to actually contribute more than what our societies have been allowing them to. So again, we cannot fly on half an engine, we cannot fly on one engine. So we definitely need to look at gender as being essential to our growth prospect, period. Now, the second thing is, the reason why we are linking the discussion on fragility with empowerment of women is essentially because women and children, unfortunately, bear most of the weight of fragility in our countries. Unfortunately, often men are the perpetrators and women are suffering from it. So it is important to empower women to also be in those decision circles that lead our societies to actually shift into those disequilibrium that leads to conflict. So that's clearly something we will want to emphasize.
Thank you so much for that. Nana, as we go to take questions from the floor, I just want to tap into some of the other areas. Climate change, for instance, having huge impact on resource allocation and therefore fragility. What else are you identifying that we really need to keep in mind when it comes to solving the problem of fragility?
Thanks, Julie. For us, it has really just highlighted the need for partnerships and collaboration. So dealing with regional government and civil society partnerships. In West Africa, we have found that the Ouagadougou partnership, and in East, Central, and Southern Africa, there's a community network as well, really where we're able to support governance as development partners, and then really building on the ability to share experiences, sometimes even human resources, and just lessons learned. Another key thing that we are finding in our work, because we work both in development and humanitarian settings, is really to bridge that gap and look at it as a nexus. So how can we work at transitioning? There might be contexts in which there are shifting conditions, sometimes back and forth between humanitarian and development. How can we really engage so that even the smallest efficiencies in small subsystems can really contribute to resilience? We have found that one example is right now in the Kenya-Somalia border, we have a Gates-funded project where we are trying to improve maternal and reproductive health for nomadic and semi-nomadic populations. So these are populations on the move. They require services while they're moving, but they're also plugging into services when they, at static facilities, when they mix with the settled population. So how can we interface with this population that is dealing with the realities of climate change? Their local organizing bodies are considering that. They are also looking at the issues of security. So all of that is in the mix while we're trying to basically create a system of mobile community units for them. And that has been really interesting and challenging, and is the way of the future of really bridging the humanitarian and development nexus.
Thank you. Absolutely fascinating, because we do have ecosystem issues, partnerships absolutely critical, and people coming in to bridge the gaps where they have the competencies. Let me open to the floor. We'll try to take 3 questions. If we can, we will take more. So gentlemen, right at the front, then I'll take the lady in green there, then I'll look to the 2 sides of the room. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Femi Akibi. I'm a Nigerian. I'm glad to be here, and I hope the day will come when all Africans will speak in one language without a translator. Second, as we speak about the fragile state of the African continent, a lot of things that is the undercurrent of our fragility we're not discussing. 1, 1844 scramble, the continent is too small individually to compete. We have the issue that we haven't even changed our names. We haven't changed our boundaries. We don't have the same banking system. If we are going to look at the international scene, we have to look at the colonial park, who took 500 billion from the African country every year for what is called a colonial tax. The issue of having right to our procurement, the right to our military systems. Those are the things we need to start to look at. Second, in Nigeria, for example, a country of about 180 million people, we are using 70% of our oil income to pay interest of loan. There are no countries in the African continent. We are lying to ourselves. We have flags and we have national item. Until we address our border issue, fragmented issue, boundaries issue, and so on and so forth, we're not going anywhere. The quicker we return to a framework that is African-based, based on our culture, tradition, and our economics, then we'll be free. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The lady in green, please.
Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Kijuru, Vice President of African World Bank. Before I say anything, let's give a hand to the Vice President of the World Bank, because I've never had any Vice President speak about empowerment of women. Let's give them a hand. Now, I'm based here. My company is called Seguros International Group. I focus on agriculture, and I'm based here in Washington, D.C. As an African woman who grew up on the land, African women are farmers. African women don't need economics, though. The only thing they need money, a bush, because they know how to kneel down and make the food for the children and themselves. Though we are going digital, the telephone is not going to go in the farm and make the food. So, Mr. Vice President, what I can ask, with the IFC, I don't know if they are here, let's put more money into farmers, especially the local farmers. I'm happy World Bank has included farmers. I come here all the time, and I want you to give me an appointment so that I can come to your office and show you my paper.
Thank you, thank you.
How are we?
Can I, thank you so much. Can I ask, is IFC in the room? Is anybody here from IFC who can know? But it's an excellent point, and I think the issue of putting money into local farmers is a really key issue for transformation of the continent, and we'll bring that to the panel. Let me see hands on this side. Yes, there's a gentleman, a young man right at the end. Keep trying. Okay, another one is coming your way. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Khota Zokolobe from Lesotho, and I've heard all the beautiful contributions from the panel. Thank you very much. My concern, especially on human capital and women empowerment, is what can be done, especially given the fact that our society is patrilineal, to be able to empower women more, because I feel like more should be done to be able to do, convince fathers to enable their daughters to go to school. I'm thinking that there should be more logical considerations, because men are more logical to be able to be convinced to let their children to go to school.
Oh, you're digging yourself in a hole. Men are more logical, he says. Let me take this one, and I'll bring that to the panel. Yes, yes, please, sir. The mic is coming. It's coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Abdullah Jane. I am Executive Director of Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Let me congratulate the bank, the chief economist. Hello, you hearing me? Yes?
Please hold it close.
It's coming. It's coming now.
It is.
Both the chief economist and the VP for this excellent report. Two things. Whilst against that background, I want to raise two issues very quickly. One, I did not hear much about state of governance in Africa.
Okay.
And I think this is key. And you should we measure this, and we have an index. I don't have the time to go into that. My second is really building capacity to deal with climate-related risks. I think that's important. If you see what's happening in Mozambique and other, we know that this is critical. It's one of the factors really affecting growth in the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excellent questions. I'll come back to the panel with those questions. And I can see, please, Stefan?
Stefano.
Thank you, Stefano.
Well, thank you very much, Stefano Manservisi, European Commission. Just 3 points, because it's about fragility. I think that in our partnership, we have learned, or we should have learned a bit more, that fragility is not your fragility, it's our common fragility. And I think that this should suggest all the partners to look at that in a different way. Because this is the way in which, optimistic or realistic, but we have to find common solution, because this is what I've seen. Second point is that fragility very often is identified with the need of help in surviving. I think we should not be dragged into this. We should remain ambitious. It's a bit the lessons that we have learned in working with Somalia, with working with the Sahel. I mean, Somalia has been ambitious, has pushed us to be ambitious in building the state, in pushing us to take risk in investing in a budget which basically did not exist, but helping in creating a dynamic. Think about investment. And the Sahel being ambitious in taking its own security in the hand with the G5 joint forces. I think that this be ambitious and not just remain at the level of survival. Yes, humanitarian is necessary, but it's resilience building which is important. Society and institution. This is the second point I think I would like to underline. And the third point is about the region. And the region is wider than the border only. I mean, the region could be very far away. I think that a region which is very much close to certain fragility is Europe. And therefore we have to work in order to manage this common space, which is driven by this. And the second is in Africa. This project of the Pan-African, the continental free trade area, could be a powerful game changer on which we have to work all in order to share experience. So fragilities are solved altogether at regional level in particular. This is the lessons that we have learned, and we'd like to keep working along this line.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. Let me come straight back to the panel. And I think, Prime Minister, I'll begin with you, and I'll interconnect several of the questions that have come in. You know, Abdoulaye says, look, you haven't really talked about the state of governance directly about the state of governance in Africa. So let's talk about that. What are your views? I mean, a lot is changing. But we're also seeing, you know, very interesting, some peaceful revolutions happening on the African continent, not very often seen in the past. We're at very different stages. Give us your perspective on that. And, you know, the first comment, Africa cannot be competing with herself. We really do need to get this right. We need to integrate. Please share your...
We did talk about governance. We try to put it into big perspective that today's leadership in the continent need to take into account of the current 21st century realities in leading the continent. In our case, we are putting in place systems that will have a governance impact in our country for the next 200, 300 years, which means that we are rewriting a constitution. We put in place a security reform, an economic reform agenda, and political processes in what I think will protect and prevent future conflicts like the ones we have gone through. But what we are trying to do is to learn from our neighbors and the rest of the continent to ensure that the future problems become a strength and not a challenge to us. The element of us as African leaders now working together is exactly what you've said, to understand that we can complement each other. There's no competition. The future in the world, in terms of people and population, in terms of potential of resources, lies with our continent.
Right.
The only thing that is between that potentiality and that future and us is how we manage ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Minister, let me come to you. Next, you. Your thoughts on what he has shared with us and maybe the rest of the questions as well.
Let me say it in French.
The contributions Stefano made on dealing with fragility, not only by providing humanitarian assistance, but also by preparing for long-term economic growth. That's fundamental. Our countries have succeeded with the support of partners to deal with economic issues as well as structural issues by taking a sub-regional approach. As an example, I'll take the Lake Chad project. It took cooperation from neighboring countries to build the project so that the populations of the entire region could take advantage of these structuring projects that take account of current and future education infrastructure and economic needs, so that the entire region can leave fragility behind. I would like to applaud the contribution by our partners. The World Bank worked with us, for example, on this project, so that we could move from dealing with stability and security problems to taking a sub-regional approach to these structuring projects and measures. I'll come back to the question of our Nigerian friend. Fragility doesn't have borders. That's why we have to work together so that we deal with its underlying issues together beyond our borders. The Boko Haram issue that I talked about, the terrorism problems, led us to taking a joint and common approach because it was a common challenge. Once we deal with the security challenge, of course, we have to deal with the economic challenge. Now, on to the last point, governance. You quite rightly asked about governance. There are two aspects we need to take into account: education and participation. Education is the foundation on which we can build contributions that are political, operational. And women, young people, once educated, should be a part of the political debate, the decision-making process and implementation. That is why empowerment of women will, by its very nature, change the environment and lead to the emergence of a new era for the African continent as a whole.
Mr. Kane, come in.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I wanted to agree with everything my brother said about the Lake Chad watershed. I would like to respond to the comments made by my sister on agriculture. The digital economy can boost agricultural production, can boost farm yields. The digital economy can boost commerce and trade. It can help us establish value chains in our countries. We're experimenting in Niger. In the report that Albert was talking about, it includes digital economy because it is based on our experiences with it. In Niger, we have an agricultural development program where 80,000 agricultural farmers are connected so that they can learn about seed prices, so that they can check fertilizer prices, so that they can buy what they need at the best possible cost. They're connected so that they can put out questions. I have a caterpillar problem. How do I deal with it? Something isn't growing right. My crops aren't growing right. How can I fix that? They can call upon other people. They can call upon knowledge and they can get help. I've seen women take advantage of that kind of experience and advice. Someone, for example, who received support in growing moringa. He's got a vegetable garden but focuses on moringa. He had an irrigation problem, and through that project we were able to hook him up with a solar energy system for drop-by-drop trickle irrigation, and he was able to deal with this problem. This is to tell you that the digital economy increases, accelerates growth in the agricultural sector.
Use this digital economy to transform the continent. It's ensuring it connects to our challenges. Yes. Our time is up. We only have a few minutes, but Nana, I want to come to you, and Albert, I'll get a final word from you, and from Hafez as well. Nana, on the issue that has been raised by a young man from Lesotho, he's saying, you know, we know the societies we live in, which was what I was trying to also emphasize. What message do you have for him? What can he take back, and what can we all take back in terms of how we can do this together?
So it's certainly a challenging issue. I think there are several different factors and levels involved. But as a youth myself, I still fall in that category by AU standards, so I will claim it. As a youth myself, I mean, I think Save the Children, we really encourage youth to participate at every level of the process. I'm a researcher and also do evaluation, and so we even engage the youth in leading these evaluations and research. Really, you know, as you yourself have shown, just speaking up and stating sometimes the issues that you are facing as a story, sharing your own experiences has been really helpful. We've seen young girls in our programs who are able to speak up, but also it's about relationship building, right? So it's a partnership. We look at it not just partnerships in governments or regions, but also even in the home. So partners, parents with their children, families all together, and building on that, I think people are willing to listen, and sometimes you might be surprised. The norms you think are present may not actually be the fact. So no one may have asked a father what he thinks or what he desires, and when you start talking, you see, oh, maybe we have more in common than we thought, and maybe you just haven't had the chance or the space to share that concern and to also think together about solutions. And so really just partnerships.
That's absolutely fantastic. And often it takes one voice.
One voice.
To start the change. Albert, I just would love you to touch on climate change a little bit. We've had quite a few questions on social media as well, touching on that. And I think it was raised as well from the floor. The realities of climate change, our preparedness to deal with it. What message maybe do you have on that front?
Thank you very much, Julie. Let me say one word on the question on governance as well, right? I agree with the guest mentioning governance. We should talk about governance, but we should act seriously about governance. You know, more than 20 years ago, President Wolfenson here at the World Bank said corruption was the cancer of development. Since then, the World Bank has gotten into that space. We have worked with countries to push back. But what is absolutely clear is that it would have to start from within the countries, and the World Bank alone cannot actually eradicate corruption. It has to be from within, and the World Bank can help. What we have learned is that unless it's really endogenous, it's not going to go away. We can help, but it's important to. Now, in terms of, one quite important point coming out of our report is that the digital revolution can also help actually addressing corruption and governance issues. Digital platforms can be used to better manage domestic revenue mobilization, taxation, can also be used to have more transparency in public expenditure. It can be helped to also enforce accountability between citizens and government, and that could all contribute in improving governance. On climate change, I think it is absolutely clear that one of the drivers of fragility increasingly in Africa is coming from climate change. We need to anticipate, we need to move from a reactive mode and really start preparing our countries and making our infrastructure, our growth strategies resilient to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. You have the final word.
I have the final word. Thank you. Well, actually, let me say two words. One, on the issue of Pan-Africanism and economic integration. We were, my colleagues and I were visiting the Silicon Valley last week, talking to technology companies and seeing how we can get them interested in investing in Africa. And I noticed that they were doing a lot of investments in India. And I asked, why you're going to India and not Africa? The response was, India is 1.2 billion people. Africa is also 1.2 billion people. But India is one country. Africa is 54 countries with 54 different rules and regulations and 54 markets. And so the issue of economic integration, so that we can have one big market that is attractive and that is competitive, is a very, very important issue. Second point I want to make, I just wanted to support Stefano's point on being ambitious. As often we are not ambitious enough in Africa. We have to set to ourselves big goals, ambitious goals, and really work hard to achieve them. It is not worthwhile to achieve small goals. It is only worthwhile to achieve big goals that will transform the continent and will make everybody's lives much better.
Thank you so much for that. Ordinarily, I share African proverbs, but there have been so many words of wisdom from this panel. I'm going to try to share some of those. You know, be ambitious, dream, go for it. Africa must. We have no choice. I think it's exciting that we have the African Free Continental Trade Area happening. Big things can happen. Let's move. We've been told Africa has been driving on half an engine. Half an engine, and look how resilient and strong we still are. Imagine if we had the full engine on. And then finally, for Africa to rise, we need 2 wings. One is not enough. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. A big round of applause to our panel. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great day. Thank you.